Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Hello again, everybody. This is the Coach Shannon Griffith here on the Hoosier Football Tailgate, a part of the Believe Indiana Network. I thank you for joining me here on Thursday. Got to turn my lights out here. On Thursday here, bye week for the Hoosiers, so I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do this weekend a little bit, which I know some of you are probably wondering the same thing. You know, what are we going to do with our time on Saturday? Well, I'm sure you guys will find plenty. There's plenty of football going on, and things of that nature. And again, it's going to be a little awkward not having the Hoosiers playing Saturday. And this morning, as part of Jim Coyle's Indiana Sports Beat Radio every Thursday around 8:50, you can catch me there a little bit talking Indiana football. And we were discussing the same thing, and I told him, you know, the old joke is that we used to say we've got bye this week and we're a 10-point underdog. So when things were going bad, that was the inside joke. When you didn't play very well and, you know, things were going your way, you had to have a little bit of levity, I guess you could say, in the coach's office and things of that nature. But I do thank you for spending some time here with me on this Thursday evening. If you're joining us live on all the platforms, by all means, please answer, or if you got any questions, boy, my train of thought tonight's in left field. If you have any questions, suggestions, comments of things of that nature, by all means, drop it in the comment section there, that we can throw it up on the screen. Everybody can see it, and we can talk a little bit about it if it's a question about something specific. I know that on YouTube you can do that as well as Facebook. I don't think it's available on the X platform. Now, I may be completely wrong because I don't understand all of this, but I just kind of have a plug-and-play type of setup in that when things go right, it works, and I look like a genius, and then when it doesn't, I look like a jackass when it doesn't go the way I want it to go. But let's pay some bills here quickly. Remember, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything sports betting. You've got the division series up and running. You know, the big win by the Mets last night. What a way for the Mets to knock off the Phillies with that late inning grand slam. It was some really good baseball of late, exciting baseball where you're seeing things go down to the wire, and that was one of them. But remember, you've got the baseball series. NHL hockey has started up. That makes me happy, as that is my second love behind football. And then you've got college football and NFL football going on as well. Remember, every stat, every matchup, breakdown, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during games. With the largest catalog of odds on everything from football, MLB playoffs, NHL, NBA, to political props. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino and get in on some blackjack and poker action, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on all the action with Americans' most trusted site for online wagering. That's betonline.ag. betonline.ag. And remember, BetOnline, the game starts here. Thank you for them for their continued support here on Believe in Indiana. And also for those affiliates that have allowed us to be a part with or partner with them, you can find all those on my bio pages via the link tree. There, if you hit the shops icon or button, it will take you to a list of affiliates that are associated with us. And you can also find it on the website, HoosierTailgate.com, HoosierTailgate.com. And you can get some different codes and coupons and things of that nature. If you happen to buy something from one of those affiliates, we do get a little bit of a commission from that sale. Want to be upfront and transparent in that avenue, but appreciate if you do. I know the Fanatics site and Fans Edge, they do have some nice apparel items as we head into different seasons here. So they have an Indiana store directly that has all your Indiana gear that you may want or desire. Also, my shop has some logo aspect apparel items that's specific to the show. But if you happen to venture over to any of those affiliates or my website, appreciate your picking something up and buying it and doing it through those affiliates. So that is done. We're done with that. That's the beauty of getting through some of that early on in this dynamic. Want to look over here at tonight on thinking what we're going to do this evening over to the proper scene set up here as it pertains to this evening. We're going to do some things here tonight that are a little bit different than what we've normally done because we don't really have an opponent to really set up on this week. And rather than get ahead of ourselves on the Huskers, I'm still breaking down their film or TV copies that I have, and we'll get in more depth next week with them. Things are shaping up for a pretty good race here in the Big Ten when you look at it pertaining to who's all still undefeated and who are one-loss teams in the Big Ten, as well as you look through the landscape through college football. It's going to be pretty interesting finishing up the second half of the season. Again, for our purposes tonight, as you can see, Homecoming is completely sold out. I just saw something that popped along my Twitter feed that said that Homecoming is sold out. So that's a great sign, and we'll pray for great weather next Saturday in that aspect of things. And hopefully it's not a game that feels like an away game because the Nebraska faithful has bought up the tickets. But I did see that Homecoming 2024 versus Nebraska noon kickoff next week is sold out. Never fear, there is television coverage. We'll get to that there in a second. We talked about Indiana being the first school to be the school that was bowl eligible in the country last week or Monday. God, I tell you, it feels like last week. In the country from their win versus Northwestern. So that was something that we did, and everyone has talked about it pretty faithfully in that regard. I do believe we have our first weatherman giving us an update of what could be coming for next week. Robert, 71 and sunny. I hope you are correct, my man. That would be a great day with little wind and blue skies. That would be something that would be nice to see in that vein. But we shall see what all happens with that particular day, and that'd be nice if it's in that category of sunny and 71. But we'll have to wait and see to get that final entry of weather when it comes to that. Robert's going to be there. He's already fired up to get going with his son and wife. What a great day. Creating memories. That's the great thing about it. It doesn't matter how old your sons or daughters are. You create memories by going things like that and watching games, especially if you have a team that you love to follow in that avenue. So that's good to hear. I hope others are planning to be there if possible. But in that regard, a lot of things going on there. We talked about Cignetti and his bonus structure from getting to 6 wins, of course. And then we also discussed a little bit of what happens during a bye week. But tonight, I do want to talk a little bit about this NCAA settlement that has come down. We're talking NIL. We're talking the transfer portal. We're talking what's on the horizon when it comes to scholarships, the NIL, also the collectives. There's a whole big thing in that arena that is on tap when it comes to all of that. And we don't know necessarily, right now at this point in time, if that is something that is going to get all the I's dotted and T's crossed. But the judge has decided and said what they have right now in the paperwork is a go to get this settled. Now, this ultimately will save the NCAA, number one, from going into litigation with all the different lawsuits. Terrell Pryor was the most recent former student athlete to file his lawsuit. He filed it against Ohio State, the NCAA, and I want to say the Big Ten for not being able to profit off of his name, image, and likeness. And also, there's a lot of change when it comes to roster size limits and things of that nature. We're going to go through a little bit of that because whether or not it's something that you agree with, disagree with, I don't necessarily think that everybody has a firm grasp of what is happening in college athletics, what it could ultimately mean as it pertains to the future. But these things that are happening right now could be implemented as early as 2025. With this settlement, it also allows them to distribute some money back to the conference schools, somewhere in the neighborhood of $22 million that the schools can utilize in dividing up. So of some things. So I'm going to go through that here just a second with that as it pertains to how it may or may not impact the college athletic landscape, how it may or may not impact the group of 5 schools when it comes to their status in the Division I arena and things of that nature. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, talk a little bit about realignment and what could all that mean, as we've seen some of that already with Big Ten and the Big 12, as well as the SEC, ACC, already positioning themselves where they have actually poached schools from other conferences. And this past week or so, when the Pac-12 essentially dissolved and left Oregon State and Washington State kind of holding the bag, and if you had to feel bad for any schools in this dilemma, those 2 schools would be probably at the top of the list, because all the Pac-12 schools bailed and Oregon State and Washington State were not invited to the dance. And so ultimately, they all of a sudden, the Pac-12 had only 2 member schools, which is not enough to be regulated as a conference. And so it lost a lot of things when it came to the bids and everything like that to the NCAA tournament, whether it's March Madness and things of that nature. And it also impacted their scheduling in some regards as well. I mean, it happened last couple weeks ago when you saw Oregon and Oregon State playing their rivalry game about week 3, the Civil War rivalry game, as was the Apple Cup between Washington State and Washington. Can you imagine Indiana and Purdue playing week 3 in their rivalry game, and how odd that would be for that to happen during that time? I mean, I'm not sure you would ultimately say that, maintains a rivalry status as you look at it. But, that's what happened to Oregon State and Washington State. They had to play those games like week 3, or they weren't going to be able to play them because the schedule was not going to allocate the time at the end of the year to play those traditional rivalry games. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I got some things that I think are interesting when it comes to what all this is going to entail and things of that nature. Again, if you're joining us on either of the platforms, Facebook or YouTube, please, by all means, if you got a question, comment, suggestion, by all means, put that in the comment section. I'll see most of them. And if it's something that we can answer as we go along here, be more than happy to. Like I said, I'm not sure you can do that with X, or formerly Twitter, in that regard. So apologize for that, but I have no control over why they don't allow that. I never understood that, but we'll see if that ever changes in the near future. But yeah, please participate if you feel so, do so. Also, remember to like, comment, subscribe to the Hoosier Football Tailgate, whether it be YouTube. Follow me on X at Hoosier Tailgate 55 or Coach Griff 55. And then, of course, on Facebook, as well as Instagram, TikTok, all the different platforms that are out there. By all means, please give us a like, comment, subscribe, especially on the podcast platform, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Apple Podcast. Again, anything that you can do to help us bolster our reach in those two and all those different arenas, greatly appreciated. And then again, if you have any questions about something specifically as it pertains to Indiana football, or general question overall in as it pertains to college football in general, by all means, feel free to drop me an email at HoosierTailgate55@gmail.com. So happy to do that as well. Let's look at some things here as we kind of go on with everything. I'm going to try to get some things up here that we can get going. Couple things with all this, and I've got some slides. We're going to talk through them. If you got questions, again, by all means, please ask. I'm going to maybe give you my thoughts and feelings on some of this stuff as we go along. Some of it I agree with in terms of how it's shaping up. Some of it I'm not too fired up about what is going to maybe transpire. Again, this is going to be a learning curve as we go along, because right now, we've kind of put the cart before the horse when it comes to name, image, and likeness, as well with the collectives and what their role in all this is and how that may or may not impact everything as we go. But we'll take a look at it here right now. Name, image, and likeness is something that's been around for a while. I think that came about in 2022. One thing that I think impacts this is when you look at it is the different regulations that states may or may not have. For instance, in Indiana, there are no specific laws when it comes to NIL, name, image, and likeness, as it pertains to the collegiate level. However, at the high school level, the IHSAA strictly forbids it as it pertains to amateurism and someone that would benefit off a name and image likeness type of advertisement, or doing something via the different social media platforms, and they were paid for that, they would immediately lose their eligibility. So other states, however, are now allowing high school kids to do name, image, and likeness as they are in high school. One of them we've talked about pretty extensively is Juju Lewis out of Georgia, who is one of those guys that has verbally committed to USC, but he's still in the background with Indiana, and he has a multitude of NIL agreements, and he's somewhere in the avenue of $1 million already. Supposedly, haven't had anything that says verifiable or things of that nature, but the kids that may need this, as it pertains to kids that come from areas that maybe they're living with grandma, there's an issue with mom or dad or something to that nature, they're giving kids an opportunity to earn money, and a lot of it is to support their family. And I don't know where Indiana stands in that regard with the IHSAA, but right now in the state of Indiana, like I said, it is forbidden for high school student athletes to partake in name, image, and likeness agreements. So there's some inconsistencies there that are going to have to be worked out through the state legislatures, or even if it goes into a federal level, what all that entails. You always have the exploitation risk with some of these individuals, and maybe some shadiness that goes on out there. Then you get to the federal law thing that I brought up that may reduce some opportunities and things of that nature. So there are some things in the current system that are kind of, uneven, or in some cases, not even on the same page as other state entities. Profit sharing is the most intriguing as well as important topic in this discussion. Now, I have always, as a former player and as a former coach, I had this belief that college athletes should get money above and beyond their athletic scholarship. As a matter of fact, I wrote my thesis in grad school where I surveyed different college conferences throughout the country this specific question when it came to paying student athletes and what was their feeling and how that may or may not look back in 1991-92. And the vast majority of Division I schools answered in the affirmative that student athletes should be able to receive money above and beyond their athletic scholarships. How that looked was something that many different answers came through, mostly in this arena of profit sharing. So how does that look? Well, some of this $22 million that may be immediately available because of this settlement would be akin to profit sharing. Now, all this in terms of college sports, and how much money it generates, and athletes not being able to partake in it for a number of years, schools becoming wealthier, especially at the FBS level, Alabamas and Georgias of the world that, have some real big name recognition. These entities are benefiting off those players. I know there's been some things thrown out there about how to deal with profit sharing, proposing trust funds that maybe would distribute the revenue to athletes as a postgraduate type of deal. I don't agree with that concept. as it pertains to how that's going to be distributed. And also probably looking at it from a tiered compensation based on the sport that you play and the revenue generated. Now, one big thing in this whole thing that is ultimately going to come up multitude of times is Title IX. And how does that impact some of these decisions of what schools may ultimately do? When you talk about football and Title IX, it always skews it because there's nothing that you can compare from the women's athletic side of the coin in terms of, tick for tack. Comparing men's basketball to women's basketball, not a big deal, or men's volleyball to women's volleyball, track programs, cross-country programs, swimming programs, where it's, the only difference in those sports is that, well, I shouldn't say that this way, but men playing men's sports and women's playing women's sports. Now, I know that in this day and era, we don't have that necessarily, but you get the gist of Title IX and how that's going to be distributed potentially. And there's been talk about these trust fund entities or giving them some type of tiered base compensation as we go along with it. There are some legal hurdles that ultimately are coming up in this equation. One of them is in this collective bargaining arena. There is nobody that is anywhere close to being an advocate to collectively bargain for the student athletes because they do not have unions as a representation. Now, you can say all you want, or the administrations or the people that are, NCAA or whatever, at the end of the day, when you start getting into distribution of money because of TV contracts and things of that nature, kids are entitled to some type of percentage of those earnings. And if you don't have somebody that is on the other side of the fence representing student athletes, then it's not a fair shake at the table. The only way that's going to happen is that you're going to have some type of union that athletes are a part of, that those entities can bargain collectively with these conferences or schools, or however you want to look at it, that they are at the table with some muscle behind the bargaining chip, as it per se, but is ultimately, representing student athletes. Now, one of the big hurdles right now is student athletes are not classified and have never been classified as employees of an institution. They're exchanging their athletic ability to get a free education, which comes with room and board and also meals. Now, when I went to school, and I was fortunate enough to be a scholarship athlete about 50 pounds ago as a quarterback at Ball State, we never got anything that went above what you'd call the cost of attendance. So when you talk about cost of attendance, you start adding in additional money items that it would cost to go to that school. In terms of extra labs, we're talking, necessities that a student may need to garner what they're going to do day to day. Things of that nature. When my son went to Indiana and played for Kevin Wilson, and that time period, they got a monthly stipend above and beyond their scholarship money that was basically taking the scholarship to what was referred to cost of attendance. So there's already been the stipend idea that they've done with the cost of attendance. I'm not going to say it was a lot of money, but I think it was in the neighborhood of $1,500 additional a month. In some cases, depending on what how many hours you took and the things like that. But right now, no athlete is considered an employee. Now, there was a case a few years ago where Dartmouth basketball, men's basketball, sued Dartmouth to unionize to be determined as employees of the institution, which opened them up to other benefits, and they wanted to be a unionized entity to bargain for those things. That case actually won. I think Dartmouth won that case to be recognized as employees at Dartmouth. Now, Dartmouth is a private school. You can get into this thing, private versus public, and what all's involved. But there is some possible court cases that are in the affirmative as it pertains to college athletes being able to unionize. So, and then the path that they talk about granting athletes union rights would allow them to negotiate their compensation, any benefits, working conditions, things of that nature. And you talk about what kids do now when it pertains to their season. They have a 20-hour rule in season as it pertains to what they're allowed to have football wise in a mandatory fashion. That also gives them 1 day off per week. That's an NCAA rule that was instituted a while ago. So there are some guardrails there. Now the student athletes didn't negotiate that, but I am a member as a former player, as a former coach of the College Football Players Association. It's an entity out there that former players are a part of, coaches as well. And the purpose of it is to be a possible entity that would be something that could represent in a unionized fashion student athletes. And I think the gentleman that has ran this was at Minnesota as a professor for a while in sports, entertainment and things of that nature. Jason Stahl is his name. I actually did a podcast with him not too long ago, but it's called the College Football Players Association. There are others out there, maybe not necessarily looking at it from the player standpoint. They're looking at it from a potential money standpoint that they may make from it. The College Football Players Association that Jason has established is more of like a 501c entity, nonprofit, that's looking for the opportunity to be that in that regard. So that's that. We'll come back to some of this, and I'm going to go through it quick. I don't want to bore you. The reclassifying athletes as employees, we've talked about that. You get into the labor relations and all the things that could go there, and then what precedents are out there. Remember, Northwestern football did attempt to unionize in Illinois, sued the school and the athletic department, but came up short, not by much, as it pertains to becoming an entity that could unionize. However, again, it gives some precedence to go back and look at what were the pros and cons of that case and how can we make it better. In the world of NIL, I think one thing that gets lumped together in this is what NIL is and what is the profit sharing model on the other side. And the best way I try to explain it with these collectives and such, collectives in NIL are outside the reach of the university as well as the athletic department, and they cannot be involved in them. So Indiana has two collectives, Hoosiers Connect, and I think the other one's called Hoosiers for Good or something to that extent. But they're their own entity. They're not controlled by the Indiana University or anything with Scott Dolson and the athletic department. There is one that is even beyond that. That's that Hoosier Hysteria collective that's out there. That's the one that kind of got into, I guess you'd call it a pissing contest with basketball in terms of what would be made available for the kids that had NIL agreements. Now, those type of agreements, again, are settled with the coach, with not the coaches, but the players and those entities and what that is. I'm not going to go into Hoosier Connect or Hoosiers for Good. They've got a lot of good things there going. If you want to look at it, you can search it. But they've done a good job of getting ahead of this. Now, when you look at NIL in that arena, this has more to do what is a student athlete's presence on social media. On3.com is probably the best place to go to get relative information as it pertains to what is a student athlete's value in the world of NIL in terms of promoting a brand, product, or whatever. And you can go there and look it up, and they kind of can give you an idea what a kid's value is. So, for instance, Shedeur Sanders right now is probably in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 million when it comes to name, image, and likeness. Peyton Manning's nephew at Texas, before he even became a player or a starter there as a true freshman, standing on the sideline, had a NIL value of about 2 million. So you're going to see different levels for that. They do have algorithms that give somebody's value based upon the number of people that interact with you on social media, how many people are following you, blah, blah, blah. So NIL is more outside the fence when you talk about that in collectives that have no responsibility back to the institution as it pertains to involvement, in that regard. The NCAA, as well as the institutions, want to change that. They want that to be all in-house. And the reason why they want it to be all in-house is because they want to control it. And I don't think that's a good idea either. But they're going to fight for that. And that was one of the big hangups with the settlement as it pertains to collectives and these entities that are working with NIL, because you saw what happened in Nevada. In some cases, there's no formal contract that stipulates you're going to get X, Y, and Z. It's a handshake and a belief that you're going to do it. Florida has that multi-million-dollar lawsuit of that former quarterback that is actually at Georgia now that is suing them because they reneged on somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million because they had a coaching staff change. And the new coaching staff was not going to honor it, but the kid had written documentation, and so far they're now in court with it. So name, image, and likeness has its own thing that needs to have some guardrails in place. There is a third-party entity now that is going to either approve a deal or send it to arbitration because it may not be what we call fair market value. And I'm not quite sure how that is all going to work, but that's kind of the entity that they're looking at when it comes to name, image, and likeness. If it's on the outside of the institutions in the NCAA, they're going to have some type of arbitrator there that are looking at these deals kids are making and making sure they're they're at a fair market value, and somebody's not getting the third team quarterback is getting this great big deal at for this product, while the other 13 quarterbacks don't get anywhere close to that. I don't know how they're going to do that in terms of what is fair market value. Fair market value to me is what somebody's willing to pay for your services, irregardless of the name on your back or what position you are on the depth chart. It all has to do, again, with social media presence and what you do there. Some of these kids that are not even starters have great social media presence, and they can do a lot. So I'm not sure how you get over that entity with it. Now we get into the breakdown of this $22 million. I've seen anywhere from football taking 85% to 90% of it, and then the rest of it will be divided amongst the other school entities. So like men's basketball, women's basketball would get anywhere from 10 to 5 or 5% for women, or 10 to 15% for the women's and men's basketball program, and other sports would get maybe as high as 5% or less. So if you look at that $22 million and you say it's 85%, you're talking about $187,000 that Indiana can divide up in their football program and be able to utilize, like Coach Signetti having control of that money and how he's going to divvy it out in terms of what a player will or will not make. That money will go up. It's also something, again, if there's a collective bargaining agreement and you're talking billions of dollars and you're sending $22 million to Indiana, the reality of it is that's pretty cheap when you talk about the billions of dollars. But here's where you get into the potential violations of Title IX as it pertains to equal playing fields. But we know it's not equal. Football and basketball are your two biggest generators of income, and football, irregardless of where you're at, generates more revenue than college basketball teams do, including at Indiana. That may not ultimately be the thing that you want to hear, but in reality, it is. We talked about that. Let's go down here to the pie chart. This gives you an idea, too, of some of the NIL distribution estimates that football was making versus other sports. As you can see, it's much greater than men's basketball and women's basketball here at 20%, and then other sports somewhere around also at 20%. But football, name, image, and likeness, was getting more in terms of deals throughout college athletics in some of that. Again, this is a chart that I think was done in 2022. And let me reduce myself so we can see all this. And the three big conferences in this model were what conferences were making in revenue versus athletic compensation. And you can see there wasn't much compensation going on, but there was a hell of a lot of money being made. So you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, 800 million. And that's a lot of money that's not being divided up in the world of college football when it comes to the kids and what they may garner from being at a particular school. So when you look at it from a perspective of what coaches make or what they get paid on top of what, kids are getting, it's peanuts. Coach Signetti just picked up like $3.1 million because the Hoosiers are bowl eligible. And they're bowl eligible because the guys on the field won. And they're also, the assistant coaches are getting a $500,000 boost in their pay, which is great. But again, those kids aren't getting any of that. And they're the ones that went out each and every Saturday and won. Now, I'm not taking away from what coaching is and how they get there, because you can say, compare it to last year and this year, you can definitely say, yeah, this is a more advantage as it was to Coach Allen. At the end of the day, though, the kids are the ones that are making the plays and scoring the points. And when it comes to that stuff, with everything on that tier and stuff like that. Let's see what else I got here. All right. Yeah, let's get into this, and I'll come back and wrap some of that up. But anyway, the college schedule is out for next week, the 19th, the homecoming game in Indiana is going to be on Fox. That game will kick off the big noon kickoff on Fox at noon next Saturday. And then directly after that one, I think it's Oregon and Purdue. So it'll be interesting, but Indiana will be the big noon kickoff game of the week next Saturday. Now, how cool is that in the world of Indiana sports in terms of being a team that's getting that opportunity to play on a national scale like they have when it comes to Fox and how that is all put together and being a part of the big noon kickoff, because usually you only see Ohio State, Michigan, and some of these bigger schools in that regard get that type of pub on every Saturday, and Indiana's more of a Big Ten network, Peacock, and some of those things. Now they got the opportunity to play on NBC's the night game when they played UCLA, but this one will also be something that will be a great opportunity for Indiana to show the nation what they're about against a opponent that is going to be really, really good in that aspect of things. Now here's to wrap some of this up. Oh, also, I don't know if you guys saw this or not, but the Kurtis Rourke, the Maple Leaf Rocket, or whatever they're calling him, was the Big Ten Co-Player of the Week this week in the Big Ten. So congratulations to Kurtis, who has shot up on a mini draft boards already because of his play thus far this season and how he's graded out and what he's been able to accomplish in 6 weeks and with this group of wide receivers. And to see where they're all at this point in time in some respects is kind of unbelievable. But congratulations to Kurtis Rourke and things with that being the Big Ten Co-Player of the Week. That's great to have one guy represented on that stage. So congratulations to Kurtis. Let's get back to what I was discussing earlier. And I know I'm a little bit on tangents, but this is what I think it comes down to. And here's how I believe in it. And I kind of said this earlier. Do I believe that student athletes should be compensated above and beyond what they're getting via scholarships? Hell yes. They deserve in this day and age to be compensated for the money that they're helping garner, the conference that they represent, as well as the school. And it's billions and billions of dollars. Indiana was getting a big chunk of money from the Big Ten Conference, more so than what Notre Dame had in their budget. So Indiana had a really bigger budget than what Notre Dame had. And again, they weren't at the top of the heap either of the Big Ten, but because that they equally distributed that money, Indiana benefited from those TV contracts that were negotiated not only with the Big Ten Conference and the Big Ten Network, but ESPN and other entities that were out there. And we saw that this year with CBS moving to covering the Big Ten along with NBC because ESPN decided to go all in on the SEC. And those contracts for those conferences are big time money. So hell yeah, I do believe they should be compensated with some guardrails in terms of establishing that. I also believe they need to have the appearance of a representation in terms of a entity as a union. I talked about the College Football Players Association that I'm a part of, that Jason Stahl has started. Like I said, it's a 501c, but I believe there needs to be some entity that has the interest of the student athletes at heart. Talking to Jason Stahl, he believes that the model that should be implemented is similar to what the NFL has in terms of what they agreed upon in terms of distribution of profit sharing. What is their, what does the week's practice schedule look like? There's no, and days off, and having a true, what they call a true off season. Because when you look at it, as soon as the season's over, you got Christmas. If you got into January, you got some things there. But as soon as you get into that second semester of school, they're already demanding and monitoring kids as it pertains to getting in the weight room and doing things of that magnitude. And there's really no true time off. And then all of a sudden, spring camp started. So again, it's one of those things where if you're going to have money involved in all this equation, it's going to supersede what the NCAA has already in place when it comes to student athletes' rights or what a student athlete can or cannot have. Now, I do believe you got to have guardrails. And right now we don't have any guardrails. So let's look at the transfer portal. Right now, a kid can transfer as many times as he wants. That's ridiculous. There's no way in hell that you can have a kid that's going to transfer multiple times and not have any consequences for doing so. And biggest one is academics. Is that kid going to be eligible at any institution if he's jumping in the portal every time? So I do think there needs some guardrails on the transfer portal. I know that they just this week shortened, I think, the spring period for the portal, but nothing's changed as it pertains to the number of times, because remember, that was a case that was actually litigated, and thus far, it sided with the kids on being able to transfer as many times as they want. But if I looked at it to having a guardrail as it pertains to that, I would think you get one time to transfer if you don't feel the things are adding up for you at a school, or when there's a change in staffing, whether it be the head coach, whether it be a position coach that kid plays. That would also open up the avenue to jump in the portal based upon those things that have changed in that kid's mind. Now, that's just kind of how I see it when it comes to the transfer portal. Dates, when, all that, I'm not smart enough to determine how that all works. I just know that there was a lot of problems with the portal this past winter because it was butting up against high school recruiting, and it created some problems, but that's going to have to be ironed out. But yes, I do believe in the portal. I believe that a kid has the right to transfer, but I don't believe a kid has the right to transfer multiple times. As well as in that aspect of things, when it comes to having a union representation, these are all contracted things that are going to have to be ironed out. So if a kid has a deal in place with the school and he's getting X amount of dollars, and don't look at NIL because that's the kid and that entity, has nothing to do with the school. But if that kid leaves said institution, is there penalties for him doing so, and what are they? So I believe as well that a kid has to have some boundaries as well, and some negative aspects that if you leave somewhere, you're going to have to pay some money back if that is what is in the arena. NIL, for the most part, kids are getting lump sums. That's not good either. There's got to be something there for the kids that protects them against themselves and builds something for them. Also, academics, how does that come into play? We know that kids have to pass at least 12 credit hours per semester, but they also have to stay on point to graduation for the number of credits. And you add that equation into the 20 hours per week in season and other things that kids are involved with, you can see it can get really chaotic for a kid in terms of navigating those things that schools have because you're on scholarship. Okay, so there's some entities there. NIL, agent representation, I do think that's the kid's lap, mom and dad's lap. However they need to settle that or however they want to do that, I would actually say, look, if you can keep those things in-house between your son or daughter and a family member is the one that helps do that, rather than the agent route, in terms of what all that's going to do, you're going to have to get a lot of things spelled out if you have an agent. And then on top of that, does the NCAA allow a kid to have an agent? Right now, you can't until you're in your senior year or you declared for the draft. So that's another thing that's going to have to be legislated in terms of what can a kid not do when it comes to agent entities. Like I know Arizona's got a great deal in some of their sports out there with the car dealerships. I mean, kids are driving around in cars that are essentially leased, but they turn them over every 3 months, but a kid's got a brand new car that they're driving around. You know, that's a deal like you can run for NIL. You know, kids need out, you know, some kids don't have the fortune enough to get a car. Now they're going to have some money to potentially do that. But I do think financially speaking, there's got to be some guardrails on the kid. You just can't give them a bunch of money and say, here, you're done. Do with it what you want. We got to have some guardrails in it, because if you look at it from the standpoint of investing it strategically and utilizing it in the right way, you know, a kid can come out of a 4-year deal or however you look at it. Not all kids are going to the NFL, but they could have a nice little nest egg built up if they're smart about it. So I do think there's some things there with it in terms of how that all works with name, image, and likeness. But that is the kid's entity. Profit sharing, how that all works, collective bargaining in terms of what all's involved, not just with money, how a kid is, you know, in season versus off season. Do they get time to themselves? How that all works out. I do think those are things that are going to be coming. It's not going to happen overnight, but I do think there's something there for it. Also, last couple things here. NCAA today, roster limits. Football is going to be at about 100, maybe 105. The NCAA is doing away with national letters of intent, because now how they may look at this with scholarships and stuff, they may treat them just like regular students and things of that nature, but they're getting rid of NIL, or the national letter of intent. So there's going to be more coming out about that. Roster size limits. I know football's at 100 to 105. Everyone will be on scholarship. No more walk-ons, which is a sad part of it. Okay? So there's some things there when you talk about roster limits and when you talk about national letters of intent. It really doesn't involve a letter of intent. It may be more on the lines of a contract spelling out you're going to get X, Y, and Z, and then on top of that, you're going to get X, Y, and Z from the collective bargaining entity with all this. So there's a lot of things that could work its way into all of this that, could benefit student athletes if it's done right and somebody's on top of it and you got guardrails. So there's no question. I'm all in for kids being compensated. I'm all in to having guardrails and rules on who all is going to be in charge of being the watchdog as it pertains to transfer portal, as it pertains to what they get from profit sharing and things of that nature. So it all betters the student athlete experience. And the last thing is this: we cannot get sidetracked that a kid goes to a school and doesn't leave with a degree. There's got to be something there with academics, because that's why a kid is there. They're there to set them up for the next 40 years of their life. Now, if they can go to an entity and play football, basketball, whatever, and get money for it and utilize it in the right way, but at the same time get a degree in whatever field that is, they're going to be well ahead of everything when they head out into the world and they're responsible for themselves. Not every college football player at Alabama, Georgia, whoever is going to make it in the NFL. And even if they did, the average length of stay in the NFL is like 3 to 5 years at most. So we can't lose sight of the academic component in all this, because that's what these entities do, educate. But we got to figure out how we make that happen for a kid as we navigate down this road and collectives and things of that nature. I think the collectives should be left on the outside, and the kids, moms and dads, are the ones that need to handle that. And then you've got to have something in terms of a unionization with the college athletes that they can bargain collectively with their entity for what they're going to, or how that they're going to divide these TV contracts and things of that nature going ahead. And these schools have made a shitload of money over the last 40 years or so. And it's going to happen in that regard. Last thing for me, because we got to get out of here, and I don't want to appreciate you guys hanging in there with me and listening to me spout off on something other than the X's and O's of it. Realignments and what that's going to look like. I do believe we're going to have super conferences. I don't know if we will still have what we call the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, how that all will work. I do believe we've already started that with the Big Ten and the SEC. Really, between the two of them, they have 34 schools involved collectively between the Big Ten and the SEC. So we're already seeing that super conference entity. It could mean that the bigger schools, super conference schools, branch off to their own division, and the group of 5 and the rest of them have something else as it pertains to how they're going to do things and compensate athletes. That, to me, is probably the better way, is that you have 2 separate divisions at the Division I level, the super conference entity versus the group of 5 entities, and how that's all going to go, how they're going to schedule games and things of that nature. But the super conferences should no longer be able to schedule FCS schools. That should not happen. But we'll see what all happens. Like I read here the other day, I think the Big Ten's new TV deal is somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 billion. $7 billion. That's a lot of money that goes back to the schools and such. So NIL standards, financial literacy programs, absolutely. Profit sharing, absolutely. Absolutely, to have the ability to unionize for the student athletes. When you talk realignment, I do think you got to be smart in terms of regional realignment. I don't think it's good for USC in Washington and UCLA having to fly all the way to Rutgers or Maryland or wherever to play a game. In football, you can do that on Friday and Saturday. But basketball, baseball, these schools are doing some of these weekdays. There's no way you can have that alignment that way. So some of this stuff is going to have to be reimagined on all that. And then we get into how we reform the transfer portal and what we are going to call the scholarship now if we knock that out, as well as the letter of intent, as well as everything else. So I've made my case and what I believe and where the entities are heading. So from that standpoint, I do believe we're on the right track with all this. Doesn't mean that it's going to happen that way. It will get implemented over time. 2025 with some of this stuff, but each year I know the schools have already been told, and they were told this summer, they can expect a 20 to 22 million bump in their budgets, not only this year, but years to come, and that football was going to get 85 to 90% of it. Basketballs, women and men's, were going to get in that 5 to 10% arena, and then what was left. My only other thing here is this. Because of where we're going in college athletics, it does present the problem of Title IX issues, but as well as the schools and universities cutting opportunities in collegiate sports. And what's going to happen, your Olympic sports are going to be the first to go, as are men's sports such as wrestling, things of that nature, along with their Olympic sports. Unfortunately, that's going to happen unless somehow, some way they can keep it from happening. And I hope they do, because I do believe those schools and kids should have that opportunity. I've also heard the possibility of bringing in outside money as a means of investment. I don't like that idea, but we'll see what happens. Hey, I thank you for joining me here tonight, listening to me rant and rave about the new settlement and what that may mean as it pertains to college football as we move forward. I do see positives. I do see some red stop signs that you got to figure out. But all in all, it comes down to being able to get the kids some type of financial money to help their student athlete experience at these universities when they're playing before they maybe go into the NFL. Tuesday, we're back at it. We'll talk about Nebraska. We'll talk a lot of things about Nebraska because we have it on Tuesdays and Thursdays next week as we get back to game week and homecoming 2024 as the Hoosiers will take on Nebraska, a part of Fox Big Noon Kickoff, noon at Memorial Stadium, sellout on hand. But tune in next week as we get onto it. We'll get back with it on Tuesday. But for now, I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith, and this is the Hoosier Football Tailgate right here on Believe.